What's going on, everyone? Vampy V here, and today we're going to be talking about the Tesla full self-driving chip and how I feel it functions and its capabilities. All of this is pretty much inspired from Elon Musk discussing or mentioning Witcher for Tesla vehicles. So, in this video, we will talk about game specs along with information from a Reddit user on his Hardware 3 predictions to come up with essentially a hypothesis of what the specs of full self-driving are and its potential. And if you're new to the channel, I upload twice a week, once on Monday and once on Thursday at around 10 a.m. Central Time. So if you're new and you like the content, feel free to subscribe, and let's go ahead and dive in. Alright, so first I figured we would talk about the original Reddit post. This happened a year ago. It was from Green the Only, and it did prompt Elon to tweet that this guy should work for Tesla, where he declined. So let's go ahead and jump in here. So for the past few months, Tesla has been sharing details about Hardware 3. So look, today we have some information about what Hardware 3 actually will and won't be. What do we know about the Tesla's upcoming Hardware 3? We know quite a bit now thanks to Tesla's latest firmware. The codename for the new HW3 computer is Turbo Hardware. We believe the hardware is based on Samsung, I'm going to say Exynos, probably butchered that, 7XXX SoC, which is an octa-core processor. It is 8 cores, which is what I imagine it would be. Essentially, like if you've seen the self-driving chip, it's got 2 computers there, and it would make sense for both of those, or 2 processors rather, if you would like to call them that. But it's got like 2 processors that I imagine both would be at minimum 8 cores for that fast processing time. All right, and so it's based on the existence of ARM A72 cores. This would not be a super new SoC. I do not know what SoC stands for, as the that one. SoC is about an October 2015 vintage. Hardware 3 cores are clocked at 1.6 gigahertz with a Mali GPU at 250 megahertz and a memory speed of 533 or 533 megahertz. So that is honestly fairly slow, all things considered. I'll go ahead and show you guys what a regular graphics card is. What we're looking at right here is a GTX 1030, which is NVIDIA's like lowest end graphics card of their 10 series. It is very basic, but if you look, that's for the memory for one version. There's a SDDR4, which is just regular like computer memory RAM, nothing special. It's not like DDR5. You got it at 1050, which is still 2 gigabytes for both. 2 gigabytes clocked at 3000, and then 2 gigabytes clocked at 1050, which is relatively slow. And then if you think to the full self-driving chip, we've got it clocked here at 533. And so it uses that Mali GPU, which is that ARM A72. We'll look at those specs in a second. They state that Hardware 3 architecture is similar to 2.5 in that there are separate compute nodes called sides. The A side does all the work and the B side currently does nothing, which, as you've seen from the full self-driving chip image, it does seem to have that. And essentially, I believe that the first side does all the work and the second side is there ready to do the exact same thing in case for whatever reason there are failures, because that makes the most sense for me. Because if you think about it, like you would want to they're building full self-driving. They're planning for cars to completely be capable of driving themselves. And so in the instance of any failure, I imagine that they have it set up to where it's like literally 2 of the exact same thing, and in instances of failure to compute or properly analyze something, that it will take over and continue on. So another thing that is mentioned is the neural net. And they believe with that performance level that the hardware 3 neural nets that I see in this could run at 1,000 frames per second, which includes all of the cameras simultaneously. This is massive overkill. There's little reason to run much faster than 40 frames per second for driving application, which I think our eyes only see a certain amount of frames per second, so why would it need to see more than that in theory? But the more frames the better, right? All gamers out there, I think, will agree with me on that. Give me a thumbs up if you're a gamer and you agree that more frames is better always. The previously noted AKNet V9 monster neural network requires something like 600 billion MACs to process one frame, so a single TRIP using the estimated performance above could run AKNet V9 at 66 frames per second. This is closer to the sort of performance that would make sense, and AKNet V9 would be the size of a network one would expect to see running on the trip given the above assumptions. And all that stuff is like really informative. As far as like the questions that I have personally are about how much RAM it will have, how much memory is acceptable for fast computing time, fast processing time, saving data needed for quick and accurate decisions, for them to, the vehicle to be able to completely drive itself. We're going to kind of dive into that with the fact that, Elon Musk did mention games. You already can play games on there. You've got Cuphead. We'll take a look at the requirements for Cuphead to run on PC. Then we're also going to take a look at Witcher. We'll take a look at Witcher, the regular one, and Witcher 3, because Witcher 3 being the most recent one and what inspired the Netflix series. Essentially, I think that game was really what kicked it off. And so let's go ahead and get into those. All right, so if we look here, this is for The Witcher, the original one, which is the enhanced director's cut. I'm not sure how much of a difference that really makes. It was released in 2008, so it's still a fair reference point if you ask me. It's not like any kind of refresh thing. And so the processors required an Intel Pentium for 2.4 gigahertz, or an Athlon 64 plus 2800, and so it's an AMD processor. So AMD Athlon 64, Intel Pentium 4, and then for this is the recommended. This is the recommended here. And then we've got graphics, NVIDIA GeForce 6600 or ATI Radeon 9800 or better, with NVIDIA GeForce 7800 GTX or ATI Radeon X 1950 XT or better recommended. Memory required is 1 gigabyte of RAM, 2 gigabytes recommended. So it could totally be this game. This game likely could be played. Let's go ahead and take a look at an Intel Pentium processor. So this processor, the Intel Pentium 4 processor, is a single core processor running at 2.4 hertz, 2.4 gigahertz. And so we take a look at that. Obviously, the full self-driving presumably has 2 8-core processors, so that's plenty enough to run that. And I think it's safe to assume that it has more than 2 gigabytes worth of RAM. So now let's go ahead and take a look at Witcher 3, and then after Witcher 3, we'll dive into Cuphead. All right, so now imagine The Witcher 3 with it being a modern game released in 2015. Let's take a look at the minimum requirements. I've never actually played Witcher, by the way, so I'm sorry. My friend Nick absolutely loves it, though. But let's see. So we've got an Intel CPU i5 2500K at 3.3 gigahertz, or a AMD CPU Phenom 2 X4. And so these are the minimum requirements with 6 gigabytes of RAM. Okay, so now it's specifying 6 gigabytes of RAM. And honestly, I really hope that the full self-driving chip at least has I could even see them putting in 16 gigabytes of RAM just because it's not that expensive. 16 gigabytes of memory available is not that expensive. And then for graphics card, we've got the GTX 660. Let's go ahead and take a look at that, since I doubt that they would run it on max or at high definition settings. So let's go ahead and take a look at the GTX 660. So here we are back on NVIDIA's website looking at the GTX 1660. So it's got a base clock of 980 megahertz, and then at boost it's got 1033. So this could be feasible if you consider that the graphics card was running at 533. That's fairly close. I feel like just with a little bumps down, or if you turn off some of the requirements, you could run it. And this one's using DDR5 standard memory. Wow. Oh, it's got 2 gigabytes of memory. I honestly didn't look at this before this. I had no idea what this card was. Yeah, so nothing insane, just that clock speed's at 980. It's got 2 gigabytes of RAM. It's DDR5, and it supports 4 displays. So could this be? I hope so. Let's see. Let's see if I can find a price. So the GTX 660, even Ti models can be found for relatively inexpensive, relatively cheap, $50, $60. So that's kind of big if you really think about it. So the biggest thing that I wish, if anybody knows, let me know in the comments below. Are you able to buy the full self-driving chip, the Hardware 3? I know that now you can order parts from Tesla. Like Rich Rebuilds, if you're watching this, bro, let me know if I can buy that part from Tesla, because I definitely would love to know the price point at which they're pricing it, because that'll give you a way better idea of the specs. At least I think you'd get way closer, because at least you know the hardware wouldn't be more expensive than that. So those are those requirements. The biggest thing here is that the Witcher 3 has a huge storage requirement, 35 gigabytes. My biggest thing is I wonder how much storage there is in a Tesla Model 3. If you guys know, let me know in the comments below, or even a Model S or X. If anyone knows how much memory, like storage space they have, that would be huge. So if you, for whatever reason, have that, let me know. All right, and so regular Witcher, just the Witcher, requires 15 gigabytes. So either way, it requires a fair amount of memory, depending. If you assume that a Tesla only has 1 gigabyte of hard drive space, and I imagine a lot of that would be taken up by like software and stuff. So absolutely, I don't know how much memory they have. Let me know if you guys do. But now let's take a look at Cuphead, because it 100% runs Cuphead. So we have a fair idea of what specs could be, considering I don't think Cuphead bottlenecks the car. All right, so this is Cuphead on Steam. The requirements are an Intel Core 2 Duo E8400. I guess that's E8400. It requires 3 gigabytes of RAM. These are minimum to run it, so we know a Tesla has at least 3 gigabytes of RAM, and a graphics equivalent of a GeForce 9600 GT or AMD HD 3870. And it takes 4 gigabytes of memory. So now the things that I would really like to talk on.
CQ100 standards, which is a standard automotive criteria. Next, I'd like to just walk around the chip and explain all the different pieces to it. And I'm sort of going to go in the order that a pixel coming in from the camera would visit all the different pieces. So up there in the top left, you can see the camera serial interface, where you can ingest 2.5 billion pixels per second, which is more than enough to cover all the sensors that we know about. We have an on-chip network that distributes data from the memory system. So the pixels would travel across the network to the memory controllers on the right and left edges of the chip. We use industry standard LPDDR4 memory running at 4,266 gigabits per second, which gives us a peak bandwidth of 68 gigabytes a second.
I won't even lie to you guys. I have zero idea of how that works for real. But what I can assume is, so like that's DDR4. It's 128 bytes at 4,266 gigabits gigabytes per second, maybe something like that. So I think that somehow it allows, in total it's essentially 68 gigabytes of RAM maybe. I'm not entirely sure. I do know that at one point I said it was likely like 16. That's just when I was like brainstorming on what it could be. I don't understand how any of this works, but peak bandwidth, I understand that that's like how it sends and receives information, something like that. If you guys know more, feel free to drop that in the comments below, but just figured I would kind of cover this since I did make statements as far as like what I thought RAM was. I figured I should include this as well. So in essence, what I think is, if we take a look here, we've got two core processors right here that were designed for processing with A, assuming that this is A, to be used for all the work. This does all the work for now. Maybe with full self-driving, it might tap into B a little bit, but I don't think so. I think with full self-driving release, it'll be completely dependent on this, with this one here for backup. And I imagine that they're at least 8 core processors clocked at probably low clocks, since they're not doing anything crazy, I guess. I imagine that it also has graphic card properties. So I imagine it has the properties of a low-end graphics card, probably just below that of the 1030. And it's got those properties. I believe before it used they used an NVIDIA chip, and when they were processing, I imagine it was just regular like raw GPU computing as opposed to actual rendering and processing, and that's why it's got this 8 core here, is likely for rendering in those surroundings, plus, you know, those displays and all that being ran off those graphics card properties. You know, to be able to display those and create those visuals. So just light efforts there, since they don't look too insane. If you do look at the full self-driving video from the autonomous day, those graphics there were fairly nice. So definitely, it might even be above that, but just from everything that we've seen, like I think it should be at a 1060, a GTX 1060, but it might be lower. It might mostly rely on that computing power there. You know, it's got two 8-core processors. They might even be higher cores, but I don't think that would be needed. And I imagine this whole chip likely is under $2,000. I don't know for certain, but that's what I imagine. I imagine that they've got built-in. It's kind of like a laptop processor maybe. So it's got like a laptop GPU with 2 8-core processors built in, and I imagine it's like dual function to where, like I said, if anything fails, it's got like a backup to where that can be ran, and it's got probably 16. Honestly, it might be 8, but I would feel comfortable thinking that it's 16 gigabytes of RAM. But again, you know, they are huge on not wasting things. I don't believe it could need more than 8. But again, I don't know all the properties that come into play when it comes to full self-driving, when it comes to, you know, creating and detecting, you know, vehicles, rendering them in real time. I'm not entirely sure. Like I said, I'd feel comfortable thinking that this is 2 8-core processors on like a GTX 1060 backbone with 16 gigabytes of RAM to back it up for whatever RAM might be used for in AI purposes. And so those are all my thoughts on the full self-driving chip. I hope you guys enjoyed my aspect of it. If any of you guys are more knowledgeable, feel free to drop me comments below. Feel free to DM me on Twitter if you want to tell me more about it, if you know more about it, if you just want to talk about it. And if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. And feel free to subscribe for future videos. And thank you guys for watching.